All right, Chevra, can you hear me? With the help of Hashem, we are learning Pesachim Daf Zayin. We began the sugya of Haboide Sarech Sheyevatel. Let's quickly recap before we give the intro for the Daf Zayin. And as we learned in Rashi, that the act of Bedika itself, let's use these words, even if not for your explicit bittul, will affect, let's use these words, a bittul de memela. Or the fact that you're making an effort to search out the chametz in order to get rid of it, in order to eliminate it, today we burn it, that in itself causes that chametz that you did not find is automatically batal. However, if you were then to find the gluska yafa and vedate ilave, then if you would desire to keep it, even if you wouldn't eat it, then from that moment and onwards, it would take away the bittul de memela. And as we read quickly that Rashi holds that bittul is one of the ways of fulfilling tashbisu. Tashbisu means to eliminate. When you explicitly are mevatel the chametz, thus fulfilling the tashbisu, then even if you find the gluska yafa and vedate ilave, you will no longer be oived on bal yiroa, bal yamatza. Now, obviously, God forbid, you may not eat it, but a bittul that's done explicitly cannot be undone because of your desire to eat something that you discovered during Pesach. The question the Gemara had then is, why don't you do bittul an hour before you burn the chametz? Why do you have to do it the night prior? Why do we do bittul after we do b'dikas chametz? And the Gemara gave a very practical answer, because you might forget to do it. In other words, when you're doing b'dikas chametz, you're in the game. You'll remember to do bittul. To do it stam an hour or two before, that there will be nothing to remind you. So the Gemara in Daf Zayin Amud Aleph asks, okay, I get it. Don't do bittul on the 4th hour of the day or the 5th hour of the day, but we burn the chametz in the beginning of the 6th hour. The burning of the chametz should make another bittul during biur chametz. Why don't you do it then? Only do that bittul then. So the Gemara answered, because since midrabanan it's already asur to have chametz, and the koyach of the chachamim when they impose an isur is similar to an isur d'oraisa. And as we learned yesterday, when one is not allowed to derive benefit from something, it automatically is no longer yours. It's enough yours only for you to be yoivin abal yirah abal yamatzah, but it's not yours enough to be mevatel it. So even bisman isur derabanan, which is tchilas man sheish, it's not yours to be mevatel it. That's where we left off, and therefore bittul has to happen during the time of bedika. Now we're going to have various phenomenal questions on Daf Zayin, as for example, what happens if a person finds pieces of chametz, pieces of bread? Let's just understand that the word bread here does not mean chametz. B'chlal, chametz and matzah looked very similar. They were both like lafa, like pita breads. If you find pieces of bread on Pesach and they are spoiled, which makes it harder to discern whether they are chametz or matzah, which means you don't know whether the chametz or whether it's matzah, what can you presume that it is? Is there any type of a halachic chazaka or presumptions that we can make? This must be chametz, therefore you have to destroy it, or this is matzah, and therefore it need not be destroyed. Now, just to clarify another detail, when we speak about spoiled chametz, if something is spoiled to the point that even an animal, then there's nothing to be worried about. But when it comes to the isur of chametz, even if it's not roy lachilas adam, if it is roy lachilas kelav, then you got yourself a problem. So something can be spoiled. You won't be able to recognize what it is, whether it's chametz or matzah. But we're going to discuss as to how do we determine the status of that food. We're going to introduce the concept of ozlinon basar basra. Many times we follow the last circumstance. We'll explain what that means and how that's applied. And then we're going to start, Chevra, this is mamash agmoyre de kedaf. There's not enough time, but we'll have to squeeze it in. Haboidek tzarech sheyevarech, which is a chiddush that you have to make a bracha, as we'll explain. We definitely don't make a shechiyanu. We'll explain why we don't make a shechiyanu. What do we make? So there's a machlokes whether the nusach of the bracha is leva'er chametz or whether it is al biur chametz. And we'll explain the difference in between them. That's going to lead us into the next sugya, that all brachas need to be made over la'asiyasan. And we'll see how that plays in with the nusach of liva'ir or albir. And that's going to take us onto a whole trip. We're going to speak about the bracha that we make before Bris Milah. We're going to speak about the bracha that we make before Shechita, etc., etc. And then we'll start on Daf Zayin Amud Beis, explaining the next word in the Mishnah. We're up to the words Lo'oid Haner. Why is it that Bedikas Chametz must be done to candlelight? We're going to have a phenomenal 5-step link that's going to link Bedika to Oid Haner. This is Mamash Adaf, that's Mali V'Gadush. And let us start where we left off, which was on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the top of the Amud. So Nachamol, really, Bittul has to be done explicitly. Not that it happens automatically, and it happens automatically when you do Bedika, but that can be undone if you have a desire to eat your chametz that you find, or the chametz that you find becomes yours again. If you do bittul explicitly the way we do it, then even if you discover your chametz that you oversaw, vidate ilave, and you want to eat it, you're not going to be over bal yirah bal yamatz. But why do you have to do bittul the night prior? So the Gemara explained, you need a reminder. You do bittul when you're doing something else anyways. Do it in the beginning of the 6th hour when you're burning the chametz. You no longer can do it, because if it does not belong to you, since it's already the zman of the isur, even if it's only a zman isur midrabanan, it's not yours enough to be mevatalet. Frag the Gemara, are you telling me that indeed after the zman of isur begins, the rabbanan and certainly the iraisa, it's not yours enough to be mevatalet? V'hatanya, did we not learn a braisa? If someone is learning in a beis medrash, and he remembers, I have chametz in my house. So what does he do? Right? There's a real machlokes v'shayim whether the word beliboy here is to be taken literally, whether bittul beliboy means you have to make a declaration and mean what you're saying. We mentioned this bekitzur when we learned in the beginning of the Beis, whether bittul is mitam hefker, whether bittul chametz is very much aligned with the concept of hefker, or whether bittul chametz is something unique that's done b'negei chametz on Pesach, that it becomes like afra da'ara. Nowhere else do we find such an expression, and that is connected to whether you have to do it bepeh, which is like hefker, that has to be done bepeh, or whether the concept of ka'afra da'ara is enough, belev. Also, just building on what we mentioned yesterday, I know we're going quick, that really the fact that it's also b'hana means it's not yours. The Torah made it as if it is in your reshus. So that's why there's a possibility, and so hold many Rishonim, that you don't need to make a bona fide act of hefker, which is by making a declaration. You just have to be megala das, even in your heart, that you don't want to have anything to do with the chametz. But anyways, whatever bittul means, whether it is belev only or whether it is bepeh u belev, that you mevatle beliboy, and the Baraisa says this could be done whether you are on Shabbos or whether you are on Yontif. Now, when exactly were you sitting in the Beis HaMedrash, and why is that detail important? We'll see in a moment. But the Gemara speaks out. Neilem, the part of Shabbos, well, Shabbos doesn't mean it's already Bizman Isura, because Shabbos can be out of Pesach. Even nowadays, after we have a fixed calendar, right? It's not that common, but sometimes Pesach begins Motzoi Shabbos. Bishkachas law. Maybe I think that's this year to say that. I think that's what someone told me. Bishkachas like a going shechal arba asaliyas b'Shabbos. So yeah, so the Baraisa is telling you to be mavatalit before the Zman Isur. That's no problem. But the Baraisa says Yontif. Yontif means Pesach. Ela Yontif basari suruhu. And you just told me that once it's asur, even only midrabanan, you no longer can affect the bittul. Now, you have to destroy it if you find it, as we'll learn. But you can't be mavatalit. Say, Yontif means Yontif. Einochanami. However, it's not the way we think that the moment flour gets mixed with water, it's chametz. It could become chametz, and we have to take it very seriously. But there's also a possibility that a person should knead a dough, and it's not yet chametz. Right? We try to have it from the beginning until the end, 18 minutes. If it's moving, it's not going to become chametz dik in those 18 minutes. V'chulei v'chulei. Oh, there's a possibility that you have dough that is not necessarily chametz, or sometimes that you know is not yet chametz, but you also know that another minute or two, it's going to become chametz. So that's the case. When is it that a person cannot be mevatel the chametz? when it's chametz, since it's also even bahana, it's not yours to be mavatal. If you have a dough that's not yet chametz, then it's still yours. So here's the case: you were learning in a beis medrash, and you're sitting dafka not just in a beis medrash where it's not disrespectful to leave a beis medrash, but if you're sitting in front of your teacher, then it's not bachavadik for you to stand up in the middle of the class and walk out. And Veniskan, and this person remembers that he has a rolled dough. It means a dough that's not yet chametz, but if you will leave it sitting longer, it will become chametz. Or at least you suspect it might become chametz. So if you would not be lifnei rabbi, go home quickly and bake it and shalom al yisrael. Then once it's baked, it's matzah, won't be chametz. But kodam umavatale mikame the tachmet. So now, not to disrespect your teacher, you don't leave. But what do you need to do? Be mavatale. And here it works. You're being mavatale before it's chametz. And daikanama, that's the case of the Braisa, because it says hoyo yoshev beis hamedrash. And look inside the Rashi. Rashi is more or less on this height, a line or two above. Daikanama dadayin lo ichmitza. Because since the Braisa says hoyo yoshev beis hamedrash, the mashma bepnei she'eno yochel lakum v'leilach mishum ha mevatale b'libay, which implies that it's not chametz yet. It must be something that's not yet chametz, because v'i b'chametz gamur, then this din is lamali yoshev beis hamedrash. Afilim hayapanui. If bittul would have worked, it doesn't. But if it would have worked, then you got to do it no matter where you are. Ma biyodei lasis yosef. Hashbasa b'leiv zeo biyuroi. Yavalik. Again, Rashi says, Rashi holds, guys, we learned this now, we learned this in the Rashi Vidati Ilave, that bittul, why do you have to do bittul? When you do bittul, you are fulfilling, according to Rashi, the mitzvah of eliminating it, of tashbisu. If bittul would have been affected on chametz gamur, then why bebeis hamedrash? So it must be like we explained. Bebeis hamedrash only means is that you cannot. It's not right. It's not respectful for you to leave. And yes, and what you would have is not yet chametz. Once something is chametz, bismani surah, even bismani surah de rabbanan, you may not be mavatal. It will not be effective. It's not yours enough to get rid of it. Right? Says the Gemara, Omar Rabba. Omar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Omar Rav. Here we go. Hapas she'iv shah. Bread that you found on Pesach. Again, the word bread, I hear bread, it takes a while. Bread means chametz. No. Bread means bread. Bread can be chametzdik, bread can be matzah. So if you find moldy bread or spoiled bread, and you can't tell whether if it would not be spoiled, you would see. If it's so spoiled that it's not roy lachilas kelev, you have nothing to worry about. But what happens? No, it's roy lachilas kelev. You can't tell whether it's chametzdik or not. So this is a klal. Kiven sharafza matzo oigaval. The havamina here is that if you found it in a location, in a box, in a bread box that is used throughout the year, you have to determine what is the majority of items that goes into this location during the entire year. If roiv of what goes in there is matzah, then following the rule that baslinon basar roiv, then you can say what you found is also matzah, and it's going to be mutter. If what goes into this box throughout the whole year, that's the havamina, is more chametz than matzah, then based on the rule of roiv, then you have to presume that it's chametz. And what do you need to do? Well, we already learned a couple of details. On Yom Tov, you have to put something over it. We learned yesterday. During the week, you have to destroy it. But before what to do, based on roiv, you can determine what it is. Says the Gemara, let's better understand the case of Rav. If you know what it is, then there's nothing what to talk about. Then kirav matzah, so what might happen? Elot must be, like we explained, we already spoke out, so the question is, my idya kirav matzah, afilu kiloirav matzah. It should be independent of what this bread box is used in its majority for the whole year. What should be even more relevant? What is even more powerful than roiv? The klal, the rule, neima nazel basa basra, follow the last circumstance. Follow the last circumstance is based on a concept. Let's speak about the bread box. Normally, when you have a bread box, you don't put in new bread before you got rid of the old bread, but you're going to leave the bread in the back to spoil. So normally you should say, let's determine what this had in it last. And that should determine what it is right now. Is that a full proof? No, but it's better than a roiv. It's mestama that before you put in something fresh, you took out, you finished, you consumed, you cleaned out that which was there before. So if you want to look at something right now, you don't know what it is. So we're now introducing this concept of zeal. Basar, basra, followed the last circumstance. What this box is used for throughout the year should be inconsequential when you have this other better option of basal basra. Now, where do we find this? So we're jumping already. We're linking the Pesachim now to the next Masechta Shkolim, which happens to be the only Gemara Yerushalmi that we learn in Talmud Bavli. In the Mishnah and Shkolim, we speak about how are we to determine the status of money that you find in different areas in Yerushalayim. Now, money in Yerushalayim could be ma'ois ma'aser sheni. Now, anywhere money can be ma'is ma'aser sheni, yeah, but people either have the ma'aser sheni money in their location, right? When they redeemed their produce that needed to be taken to Yerushalayim, you have the right to redeem it over money, and then that money is brought to Yerushalayim. Now, that money can be used for your own chulin, but you have to use it from food, and it has to be consumed in Yerushalayim. So there are certain restrictions imposed on that money. Says the Mishnah, ma'ois, money that you find lifnei soicharei behema, in front of animal vendors in Yerushalayim, whether you find it during the times of Yom Tov, which is the time when all the Yidden go Aliyah's regel, that is the time that you have the whole influx of Ma'aser Sheni money in Yerushalayim. But even if you didn't find this money during the regalim, whenever you find it, la'olam, we presume that it is Ma'aser, meaning it's Ma'aser Sheni money. As Rashi explains, when people went to Yerushalayim, they never took their money, Ma'aser Sheni, back home. Whatever they were unable to use, they left with their chaverim in Yerushalayim, and they used Ma'aser Sheni, not that they needed to, but they generally used it to buy animals for karbanis. You're buying, it's a carbon anyways. Kachim, shlamim anyways is limited to be eaten in Yerushalayim. It was a good shidduch. So monies that you find in the locale where animals are sold, roiv of that money is Ma'aser Sheni money. No matter when you find it, you go basa roiv. Next, if you find the money bahar habayis, then the din is that you can presume that it's chulin. Why is that? So Rashi says over here, because roiv of the money that is found in Yerushalayim throughout the year, you go after the whole year. There's more ma'is chulin rather than ma'is ma'aser sheni. And even bisman haregel, you still, when you find money, you say, well, this money comes from the roiv. Roiv money in Yerushalayim is still chulin, so you get to presume that it's chulin. But that's only true by harabayis. In Yerushalayim, we'll explain the difference. It depends. If you find money in the streets, b'shas haregel, during the times of Yom Tovim, the majority of the money in Yerushalayim is taka ma'aser sheni, and therefore you have to say this is from the roiv. If you find money in the streets of Yerushalayim during the rest of the year, then you go after the roiv and it's chulin. The question is, how is Yerushalayim different than harabayis? If you look at the whole year, roiv money in the whole year is chulin. But in Yerushalayim, we're saying you look at when you find it. Why do you do that in harabayis? Or what you do in harabayis, why do you do that in Yerushalayim? So v'amar Rav Shemaya bar Zera, my tama, do we differentiate harabayis in Yerushalayim? And he explains that harabayis was not swept every day. It was hardly ever cleaned. People, to begin with, all right, they never entered Yerushalayim with their shoes. We're not allowed to. We never entered Yerushalayim with dirty feet. On top of that, guys, harabayis, people did not enter harabayis with their shoes. People did not go up on harabayis with shmutz. Harabayis is also in an incline. So the little bit of dirt that was found by nature did not accumulate. Yerushalayim, a normal city, it's dirty. You need to have street cleaning. So they cleaned the streets of Yerushalayim every day. So therefore, if there was money lost today, probably it was cleared out today. And therefore, money that you find, we say basar basra. The money that you found today wasn't lost 4 months ago, especially in Yerushalayim. You think the Yerushalmis will leave it on the ground, they'll find it right away. It was just lost. So if it was just lost, then you don't look at the whole year, you look at the last circumstance. Harabayis was not swept every day, so there you look at the whole year. Alma, we see that Omrinan, we say, Kamoy Osli, whatever was there first was taken away first, was found first. And now the money that you find is Achrini Ninu, it is just came. That's called Basar Basra. So Hachinami here also when it comes to the box of bread, why don't we say Kama Azl? Even if the box of bread is used throughout the year, Beroiv, for whatever it is, it's irrelevant. We have to just judge what was the last thing that you remember putting into the box, because before you put new bread in the box, you probably removed the old. And behind the ho'idnahu, and that which you find out is from now. That would mean that even if you use the right of the year chametz, if you find it during Pesach, it's a matzah. So says the Gemara, Shani Yachid, there's another detail. The ipusha machiach ilavi, that its spoilage proves that it was not put recently. It's so spoiled, again, it's still royal achilas kelav, but it must have been sitting here for a longer time. So the Gemara says, so then for sure it should be chametz. Then even if kirab some matzah, but nevertheless, mayhave, it must have come from when everyone was still eating chametz, first wide line. So amarabba, now, no, not that we look at what this bread box was used for during the year. What was it used for? Beroiv. No. The days of matzah are many. The days of matzah are many means that you find these spoiled pieces of bread many days after Pesach began. Many days after Pesach began. And therefore, even though it's very spoiled, which means it must have been there for a long time, well, it's already many days after Pesach began. So that also allows you to assume that it is matzah. So again, that it's permitted. Which if you can determine from how spoiled it is, how long was it there, so that alone will indicate if it's a week old and it's already a week after Pesach, it's at the end of Pesach, it's a week after the beginning of Pesach, pshita that it's good. So the Gemara says, lo, it's not pshita. It's needed, the pusha meruba. Really, it looks like it's already there for 2 or 3 weeks. 2 or 3 weeks is before Pesach. Faket, the fact that it is very spoiled, that in itself should have indicated that it is still from the time that you were using this box for chametz. But now the tema keeping the pusha meruba go milsa the chametz value, and you talk would have thought that it's chametz. Which is keeping the Rabbi Yemei Matzah Ilavi, since it's already many days of matzah, which means that you must have forgotten whatever you put in there in the back of the box. And you're putting every day, they used to bake matzah on Pesach. When you put hot, fresh bread on top of old bread, if the old bread was spoiling, then the heat of the new one will make it spoil quicker. In other words, forensics here, on one hand, you can argue, it's so spoiled, it came from this man of chametz. But since this box is being used continuously for fresh matzah, then we can say, really, it came from matzah. Why is it very spoiled? Because the fresh matzah, the heat of the fresh matzah speeded up its spoilage. And we say, every single day, nahama, bread, matzah bread, chamima afa, you break fresh bread, and v'shade ilave, and therefore it made it look more spoiled, or it spoiled it quicker, but really it's not even from before the time of matzah. It's not before the times of Pesach. But what did we just introduce? A concept that when you find something, you have the right to say, okay, what was this area used for last? Zil, basar, basra, and that will determine, and that's even more powerful than looking at the whole year and making a roiv. If you have a box, a money box, and in it you find money, and there's also money of meiser, what do? It's used for both, and now you find money. So says that Braisa im roiv chulen. Roiv means again, what was this used for during the year? If roiv was chulen, then you can presume that the money that you find is chulen. If the box is primarily used for roiv, it's used for meiser sheni, then it's meiser sheni. Now the same kasha. What are you talking about the roiv? We just established that zil basar basra, right, carries more weight than roiv. Amai Lazel, ask the person, what was this box used for last? And that can make sense. I don't care if you used it 100% more for chulin. If the last time you used this box was for meiser sheni, l'chura, first you cleared out the chulin, then you put in meiser sheni. Now you find a coin. It should be for meiser sheni. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak, Had I known what was the basra, then yes, zil basra carries more weight than roif. Here, the person does not remember what this box was used for last. So then you go to the year. What last year did I use it more for chulin or for ma'aser sheni? And you follow roif. Answer number 2. Who told you that you use the box either for this or for that? Which is why you're asking zil basar basra, what was it used for last? No, it's a large box. At the same time, you made 2 piles in the box. The box is being used both for the same time for chulin, for ma'aser sheni money. So now, when you find a coin in the box, you don't know what pile it came from. You can't say basal basra because they are both basra. Here you have to use roiv. Papa Amar, no, even if it's not used at the same time for both. Zil basar basra is based on the premise that before you introduce, let's say, chulin, or before you introduce ma'aser sheni money, you clear out the old money. You know what? Emes, you do that. But what happens if you find this new coin, big guma, in a hole in the bottom of the box? Which that leads us to say that even though you cleaned out the box, you might have overlooked this. It wasn't laying like all the coins are laying stam on the floor. It's in a crevice. So here you can't say basal basar. Taka, I used it last for chulin. I cleared it out from ma'aser sheni. But then maybe when I cleared it out, I overlooked because this coin is in a crevice, it's in a hole. Then you don't have the basal basra, which is why if you don't have basal basra, which carries more weight than roiv, if you can't use it, then you go back to roiv. We are 3 lines on bottom of the amid, and we are opening up a real shasugi over here. The negeh brachas. Let us start. Omar. This is a huge chiddush because the Torah says tashbisu. We just quoted twice already that Rashi holds that bitul is from tashbisu. One of the ways you could fulfill tashbisu is by being mevatalit. Good. No debate. One of the ways you fulfill eliminating, which is the literal tashbisu, is by burning. The Torah never said you have to do bidika. But in order for you to gather the chametz to burn it, it begins with bedika. So there's really a question of, is bedika like a hechsher mitzvah? For example, God tells me to sit in a sukkah. Did Hashem command me to build a sukkah? Now in Yerushalmi, there's a shita that says you make a bracha when you build a sukkah. So that's related. But why, we don't do that. Why don't we do that? Of course, the only way I can sit in a sukkah is if I build a sukkah. The only way I can put on tefillin is if I buy tefillin. But I don't make a bracha when I buy tefillin. Because the buying of the tefillin is called a hechsher. It's a hachana. It's taka essential, but it's not the mitzvah. So one would have thought that bedika is not the mitzvah. Because what do we do nowadays? You're boidik. You don't destroy it. You destroy it the next day. So he's being machadesh, and there's so many different ways here in the Achronim how to understand the reason behind it. Is it because bedika is that you fulfill a mitzvah of bedika even if you don't find any chametz? We put out the 10 psisim. That's a minig. That's a minig connected to the sugya. Because some hold that if you're not going to find any chametz and you make a bracha for bedika and you don't find anything, then what mitzvah did you fulfill? How can you say Ashrik mitzvah? This is mamish connected to the sugya. So there are many ways of understanding the rationale behind it, but appreciate his chiddush, which many different ways of looking at it. Bedika is mitzvah enough that demands a bracha. Now, hold on. Shechayanu we don't make. Why not shechayanu? If this is mitzvah enough to make a bracha, why do you make a shechayanu? There are many answers. I'll give one answer. One answer is that just like minhag Ashkenaz, minhag Chabad, is that we don't make a shechayanu by a bris. Sfardim do. We don't. Why don't we make a bracha shechayanu? Because there's tsar. When you do a mitzvah like sitting in the sukkah, you're taking the lulav, it gives you joy. When you're destroying the chametz, even though chametz should be destroyed, but an act of destruction does not warranty a shechayanu. And many
What about a wedding?
What
It's
about
far to make a shechino by the wedding also. So you can see that's sar for us also, Rabbi, because we're Ashkenaz.
Depends if you marry a Sephardic wife or Ashkenazic wife. That's not connected to this, but this is the big sugi over here. So it says, so now the question is, my mevarech. And guys, this is such a huge sugya because, as you'll see, it's not only related to the mitzvah over here of chametz. Now, another thing, you will notice you don't make the bracha to do bidikas chametz. That's for sure. The nusach is about biur, but the options are al biur, right? Let's go in the seder of the Gemara. So Rav Papi, Amar Mishmei de Rava, I know there are different girsas. We're going to read the girsa we have here in the Gemara. That liva'er, guys, let's teach to dispose chametz. Rav Papa says in the name of Rabba, no, al biur chametz, regarding the disposal of chametz. Regarding the disposal of chametz. Now, the continuing sugya is based on the following premise, and that is that all brachas, there's always exceptions, but the rule is all brachas need to be made over la'asiyasam. Over la'asiyasam means before you do the mitzvah. Now you have to understand digduk. Now we're going to have a digduk. You know, the words to dispose, for sure, is a statement that you make before you do something. God commanded me to do something. The question will be regarding al biur chametz, regarding disposal. Is that nusach something that you say before you do the action, or is that something that you say after you do the actions? As the Gemara says, when you have these two opinions, it's not that the latter opinion does not allow the first. Even the shita that says that you could say al biur chametz, he accepts that you could say liva'er, because the last line of the Amid, bilavayer, the word live to dispose, kul amalei pligi, the vadala haba mashma, right? It's an expression concerning the future, which is exactly what we're looking for, because you're making the bracha before the mitzvah. The mitzvah is in the future. It's after the bracha daf zayin amid beis. Ki pligi, when do they have them? What is their machlekes? Whether you are allowed to use the words ba'al biur, gevaldig, mar savar, that the words al biur regarding disposal is meikar mashma. It connotes or it denotes the past. If it denotes the past, then you may not make it. No, I'm making a statement regarding something that I just did. Now, it's not so simple, this, because de facto, searching the chametz is not destroying the chametz. Actually, we do, as we say in the Mishnah, we do it la'oid haner. When do we destroy the chametz? The next day. Doesn't matter, but the nusach has to fit. No, I know that your action, you're doing this before you're disposing of, but you can't use an expression that the words, the digduk, denotes meikara past. Omar Savar, the one who allows us to use the nusach, al biur chametz, al is also lahaba mashma. It also denotes the future, and therefore, it is okay. Now we are familiar with brachas. Let's start. Meisvei, price number one. Baruch, etc. Al hamila. When is the bracha made? Prior to Mila, like all the other brachas. If al hamila would have denotes may, then how can you make al hamila? What should be the nusach? Hassan say, listen to the words. You commanded me, even though it's us, but it's the me, us, the us, me. Me lamu. Now, the father is commanded to do the meal on the son. And the father does the actual cutting off of the arla. But not every father is that courageous. It's also acceptable for you to appoint a shliach. But the moil is not mitzuva lamu. He's not commanded. So you can't say lamu. There's no bereda. Is it not okay if not for the moil being the one doing it? But the moil is not commanded at all to do it. The tzivanu lamu means that the one who's saying it is saying that I, the doer, the circumciser, I am commanded to do it. It's not emes. So ein breda. You have no option. So Oibazoi, based on that, if really you gotta say Lomo, because Al is Mashma Meikara. The only reason why the circumciser doesn't say that is because he cannot say that. Based on that, as says the Gemara, Oibazoi, Abi Haben, if the father is the one, the courageous one doing the Milah, so Ma'ikil. So how can the Avi Ben say Al Hamila if generally Al, right, denotes past? So the Gemara says, Eina Chanami. Who said that the Braisa is saying that you only say Al Hamila Nishtames? No, that if the father is doing the circumcision, we don't pass in this way. We'll get there in a moment. But that's what the Gemara is saying right now is, then the father should say Lamu. Ashik the Shalom says Lamu. Eina Chanami. Next, similar. Meisvei, we learned in the Braisa regarding Shchita, Baruch, etc. Al Hashchita. This is our Nusach. So here again, Al regarding Shchita. If Al is Me'ikara Mashma, what should you say, Chevra? Lishchait. So Hachinami. Hachinami answers the Gemara. What Hechinami? What's the alternative? Lishchait. It's not true. What is the Shoichet obligated to Shech? There's no such obligation. Leisagya Dalav Ihu Shachat. Right? Guys, there is a chiyuv to shecht enough to justify a bracha, which is another whole topic, but there's not enough time. No, you're not obligated to eat meat. But if you're eating meat, you're obligated to shecht. But shechita is not a chiyuv on any individual. Unlike bris milah, it's on the father. Anyone can shecht. So again, if you would have said, if it's nu, meaning you commanded me, as a humble, arrogant we, you commanded us to shech. No, God did not command you to shech. So the hasush kambreda. And now we're going to have a similar comeback. There are certain circumstances where the mitzvah of shechita is on one individual more than on all others. Where is that? It's interesting. Pesach and Bechlal by Kachin. It's geschmack to learn a little bit of Kachin. So Rashi tells us that since it says V'samach yadai v'shachat, the obligation of smicha, of leaning the hands on top of the head of the animal, is on the bow of the animal, since the Torah juxtaposes v'samach yada v'shachad, based on the rule, we have to remember that shchitas ksherim bezar, shchitas kasher bezar, that ideally in the Beis Hamikdash, it's ideal for you to balabas, if you know how to shecht, for you to be the one who shechts. So in that circumstance, you are more obligated than others. So ma'ikal amemid, why is it that, as far as we know, the nusach of shchita is always al shchita? If al is meikara, so the Gemara says what it said by Mila, ein hachinami, that if you are shechting your carbon pesach, then you say the nusach lishchait, because lishchait is lahaba mashma, which is ideal, and al, according to the shita, is generally meikara mashma, which is not good. If you make your lulav, speaking about the binding of the lulav that you do erev yantiv, this is, we just quoted the Yerushalmi that says you make a bracha. When you build a sukkah, here we have in the Babli such a shita when it comes to the binding of the lulav. So you make mevarech shehachiyanu v'kimanu v'genu l'zman hazeh. You don't make the bracha ashikideshanu v'tzivanu because it's an erev yantiv, but the shehachiyanu you already make. And it's amazing how we just learned, I think it was yesterday or 2 days, 2 shiurim ago, we quoted the Marsha of the Shmoy Shel Moshiach, which is connected to Lulav. That Lulav has a special connection to Simcha, which is connected to Menachem, as we learned. So Shechayanu is taka the nusach that you say when you do something that brings you joy. Maybe that's the remez also, according to many, that explain that you don't make a Shechayanu for Bidika Bir Chametz because there's no Simcha involved. It's important, but you're destroying, you're burning. Now, when you take it on the first day of Yom Tov, you say how can you say Al Natilas Lulav? According to the one that says that Al denotes the past. Listen to this, guys. Answers the Gemara Shani Hassan. By Lulav, you know what happens? The moment you take it in your hands, you already fulfilled the mitzvah. So lulav is taka mitzvah that you make the bracha after you fulfilled it. When are you going to make the bracha? Before you take it in your hands. There's another cloud, the Gemara doesn't speak out, that you make the bracha when something is in your hand. Like by Birchas Hanehenen, right? We mentioned that in brachas, hopefully. You make the bracha when the food is in your hand, not when it's on the table. Even by hamoitzi, we put our hands on the chalas. So, and the moment you took it, you already fulfilled the mitzvah because it's in your hands. So Ena Chanami, it fits. You say Al Natilas Lulav because you just fulfilled the mitzvah. Shani Hassan de Beidna de Agva Nafak Be. Oy Gewalt. And Taka, Rashi says, Umavarich al Shavar. You commanded me to do that which I just did. So, Oy Bazoi, the words of the Braisa don't fit. Because the Braisa uses the words that when you pick it up, Nitolei to be Yoitza. Lot says boy. Lot says boy? No, Yotza boy mi boyale. If you are acknowledging this opinion that the moment you take the Arba Minim in your hands, even before you put them together, you were Yoitza. This is this Shita. So the Gemara says, Einachanami. Einachanami. Really, the Braisa should have used another expression. This sugya holds that the moment you pick the Arba Minim in your hands, you are already Yoitza. Making the bracha before you pick it up is a non-option. Here you picked it up, you were Yoitza, so this bracha has to be made with a nusach about the past. Why does the Braisa use a lashon of future to be symmetric with the seifa of this Braisa concerning Sukkah? Umishum de kaboila misna seifa, that when you enter Leisha Basukah, you make the bracha regarding the Sukkah. So Taninami, Reisha, Lotza is boy, Diktani seifa, that Ha'isa Sukkah Latzmai, you make, not Vitzivanu, but you make a Shachiyanu. Baruchato, Shechiyanu, Vikimanu, Sukkah is the Yom Tov in which God says Simcha 3 times. Greatest amount of Simcha and Sukkahs. Nichnas Leisha, but when you enter to sit there, then you make Ashek Deshanu Mitzvanu, not Al Yeshiva Sukkah, Leisha Basukah. Because there, entering is not the primary mitzvah. The primary mitzvah, Leisha, by the way, doesn't mean to sit. Leisha means to dwell. Here it's a given that when are you going to be fulfilling the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah? When you're gonna start eating. We make the bracha before you drink the wine of Kiddush, before you have the mazoinus, before you have the bread. It fits. So, and tak, it's not al yeshiva sukkah, it's leishev basukah. The Braisa is being symmetric, but really, according to our sugya, the moment you pick up the lulav of the Abraminim, you are already yotzei. Now, the Tosfos here, that's the source for a certain minig of Ashkenazim, which is not minig Chabad. The fourth Tosfos in the Amid, in the middle of the Amid, he quotes from the Ri that he says 2 things. First of all, he writes that we actually hold that you're not going to be yotzei the mitzvah before the bracha. How is that so? So Tosfos here brings that you pick up one of the minim. Many people have the minim to pick up the esrog upside down. And since they're not taking it the way it grows, so that's not called taking it. And they didn't fulfill the mitzvah, and they do that dafka to be able to make the bracha over l'asiyasim. Our minig is not to do that. Our minig is based on other shitos here in the sugya that ultimately you only fulfill the mitzvah when they are all together. So as long as you did not put it together, you did not yet fulfill the mitzvah. Furthermore, I just want to read this read. He says, Gavaldik, even according to those opinions that say that when you pick it up and we don't turn it upside down, you already fulfilled the mitzvah. But since there is a minig to do na'anuyim by Hallel, you didn't do the na'anuyim yet. Amazing. So there is still something that is in the future to be done. So that's why you can make a bracha, and the bracha is still considered over l'asiyasim. I'm reading inside the last words of Tosfos. The Periscope, the kiven should tzarich l'nanea b'Hallel. Then he writes at the end, the fact that you don't want to be yotzei until you make the bracha, that desire holds you back from fulfilling the mitzvah. And if you remember, not that long ago, in the end of Eruvin, mitzvah strichas kavana, remember that? So if you have in mind not to be yotzei, especially if mitzvahs need kavana, then that kavana can hold you back from being yotzei. Let's go back in the Gemara, v'hilchaseh. Hilchaseh, we say that you say al bir chametz. The reason why the halacha is to say al bir chametz, now that we learned the sugya, you definitely make the bracha before bir chametz. You make this bracha before bedikas chametz, which is for sure before bir chametz, is because we paskin that al denotes the future as well. And therefore, by a milah, you don't have to say v'tzivanu lamu. Even when the Aviyah ben Ismaili says al mitzvahs milah, al ashchita, because of al we paskin that al bir chametz denotes the future. Now, says the Gemara, the whole thing was based on the premise that a bracha needs to be made before you do the mitzvah. Where do we know that from? Where does that come from? So the Amar Shmuel answers the Gemara, kol ha-mitzvahs. That's the rule. That rule came to us through Shmuel. Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now, when Shmuel taught us this din, he didn't say you make the bracha before the mitzvah. He used the words oived. Oived means to go over. Obviously, in this context, oived means beforehand. Ask my mashma dahai meant with the words oived. Oived means before. So Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. We have various sources that the word oived, yes, means before. Source number one is that after Avshalom died, so they wanted to notify David HaMelech. So there was a Kushi that was going to notify him. And then it says, Vayoratz Achimatz. Achimatz wanted to come and notify David before the Kushi. So he ran Derech HaKikar, by the way of the plain. And Vayavoy Res HaKushi. In other words, he went before, he came to David before the Kushi. That's a source. That oiver means lashon of the agedumei. Abaye says Mahache, Parshas Vayishlach, right? That when Yaakov and his family met Esav, so Vahu Yaakov was Avar Lifnem. He went before his wives and his children. He went ahead. Here clearly Avar means before. The third is from Mashiach, where it says that when Mashiach will come, Vayavoid Malcolm Lifnem, that all of the Yidden are leaving Galus. But our king, Mashiach, will be walking before us in the front, and Baharvaya Beroishem, and the Oibishter is going to be in front of Mashiach as well. Okay, now that we had this rule that all brachas are made over Lasiyasam, so says the Gemara Bei Rav Amri, they learned in the Yeshiva of Rav, there is two exceptions. What are the two exceptions? Chutz min Tefilla and Shofar. Wait, we're middle of the sugya, don't jump. Says the Gemara Bishlam, Tefilla, it makes sense. Why would you make the bracha after you toivel the akata gavra loy chazi? Now, why is the man not chazi? So we are referring to the time where everyone was bound by tefillas Ezra. If a person had a seminal mission for which they were obligated to go to the mitzvah in order to say God's name, you were not allowed to daven, you were not allowed to learn. We're not speaking about a nida. We're speaking here about a balkeri. So there, he can't say Hashem's name. So he has to make the bracha after he goes to the mikvah. Even though nowadays we are not bound by tefillas Ezra, but that is how it began, that even when a woman goes to the mikvah, nowadays, she also makes the bracha after she toivels, even though you can't say by her that she's loy chazi. There's no isur. But on the other hand, this is a minig, what I'm saying, but this is a very accepted minig, that many women toivel many times, but most women toivel at least twice. They toivel once, they make the bracha, and they toivel again. Why did they toivel twice? In order to have the bracha, oiver la'asiyasam. I make it before the first because of this klal, that when it came to tefillah, primarily the reason was for the man's tefillah skeri. He was not allowed to say God's name in that time. So he already went to the mikvah, and then he made the bracha. So the same thing is also by women nowadays, and the same thing is by a convert. Because a convert, before he went under the mayim, he's not a bona fide full-fledged geir. He goes under the water, and then he makes the bracha. Okay. But the question, so that all makes sense. But Ella Shofar, my Tama, why would Shofar be an exception? And if you're going to tell me, Mishum Dilma Mikalkala, there are many details in the dinim of blowing the Shofar, and sometimes you might attempt to blow the Shofar, but it's not going to come out. Okay, it's going to be a defective blowing. If it's a defective blowing, if you would have made a bracha, it's a bracha levatala. So it's much safer, blow. Now that you know you did the mitzvah, now make the bracha. Says that cannot be the reason, because if that is what we are afraid of, also, not every time that you shech the shechita was kosher, and God forbid, not every time you do the bris milah, is the bris milah okay? So if there's a complication, if there's a potential disqualified act, so then always in such cases should the bracha be made afterwards. And because of this kasha, Ella indeed, Amar Rav Chizda, chutz min hatfila bilvad itmar. We're not arguing. We discovered that we had a wrong tradition. In Bei Rav, they only made the one exception, which is mikvah. Tanya nami hachi, taval va'ala, then ba'al yasi oimer, baruch asher kiddushanu b'mitzvayis v'tzivanu al ha'tfilah. Oy gevaldik. Okay. So where are we up to? Up to Daf Zayin Amud Beis. We touched oil. We spend a lot of time in oil. We explain why is the bedika by night, the night of the 14th. And now we're up to why lo oir haner? Why lo oir haner? And that's part of the reasons why we do it at night. If you remember, there were two reasons. Bnei Adam mitzuim b'boteihem, and one of the reasons that Gemara gave that you do b'dikas chametz night prior, why not do it during the day? Is because you have to do it lo oir haner. Where do we get that b'dikas chametz should be done lo oir haner? Minah hanemili. Amar Rab Chizda. Chevra, it's a 5-step process because we find, and this is comparing mitzia mi mitzia, mitzia mi chipush, chipush mi chipush, v'chipush mi neiros v'neiros mi ner. Come on. So let's go. Finding mitzia mi mitzia. What are we referring to? Here by chametz in Parshas Boy it says Shivas Yomim So'oid Lo Yimotzei. It should not be found. Now, if some finding, how do you find or how do you make sure that it's not found? So we find that searching is connected to finding. It is common sense. If you'll search, you'll find, but we're looking for psukim. And we find the pasuk in Miketz. That is when they were looking for the Gevia. Vayechapes, that they were searching. And Bagodol Heichel, they began looking in the bag of the eldest, or of the biggest. Ubakatan Kila, that was in Binyamin. And Vayemotzei. So you see that finding is connected to searching. Now, that's the Umitzia Mechipush Didei. In the same pasuk in Miketz, first we have the source that will connect us, that will connect Mitzia from Chipush, and now we have Mitzia. So boy from Miketz, Miketz from Miketz, Chipush searching. How do you search? So we have a pasuk. You search with Neirois, as it says in Tzefanya, regarding that which will happen with the coming of Mashiach, that as Yerushalayim Anedes, God says, I will be looking, searching in Yerushalayim. There it's a negative looking. God is going to be looking for iniquities. And now that you see that you search with Neirois, well, hold on. So why isn't B'dikas Chametz done with Neirois? Because we find the final link, Neirois miner. As it says, Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, Choyfeis Kol Chadrei Baten. Right, that the soul of Hashem is the neshama of man, through which Hashem searches in our innards. The pshat means that the way Hashem knows, so to say, that which is happening in our innards, that's which we are thinking, that's which we are feeling, is through the neshama. That means through our soul. Our soul is God's candle to see what's tutzach inside of us. So you see that you can search with a neir. So how do you look? How do you make sure that there is no yimatzei through a neir? It says the Gemara, Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. Similar. Leila Yudalad Boikeres Achametz La'oir Haner. And Afal Pisha Ein Ayel L'Davar. Nevertheless, Zecher L'Davar. And we're going through the same steps. Shneimar, as it says in Boy Yeshivas Yomim So'or Lo Yimatzei. And V'oimer V'yechapitz. By Bagodol Heichel Katan Kilo. And V'oimer V'esei Achapitz Es Yerushalayim Aneres. And V'oimer Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam. And the kasha the Gemara is going to have is only on the last step. It's once we already associated, right? Finding to searching to candles, Genukshain. So search with candles. Why do we need to have Neirois Miner? That's the kasha, my V'oimer. So the Gemara explains the kasha because V'chitema, Hai Ba'esahi, Kuluhu de Ka'amar Achmana. Fakert, Neirois would have implied God is really saying that he's not going to be searching for our iniquities with a big torch. He's only going to be using a candle because God is going to try to overlook a certain amount. God is only going to use the shraga only by candles of a light of a candle. That's a substantially smaller light, because if God is not going to be using the big torch, the oven rabba mishtakach, big sins will be found even with the small candles. But the oven zutal mishtakach. In other words, if that would have been the pshat, then being that we are looking for chametz, maybe we would have to use a torch. So that's why we needed the last va'omer tashma, that Neir Hashem Nishmas Adam, that one candle is very effective. One candle is effective, and therefore one candle is enough to search the chametz. And al pi pnimius, it's mamash gavaldik. This whole nekuda, you don't need a lot of light to be doicha choshech. That a little bit, that's the emphasis, that ma'at oir is doicha harba choshech, especially the oir arba aser, that with the lichtigkeit of the godly soul, you get rid of all of the chametz. How much godly soul do you need? 1 pintel a yid that we all have. That is enough to get rid of the tremendous amount of chametz. God willing, to be continued.
Shkoyach.
Right, we're running.
Shkoyach.
Chaval.